You and Max are teaming up, I would say, to meet a very big challenge in New York City, which is to do pizza in a competitive pizza crazy community. You both have a tremendous resume and lineage of working in top restaurants and bakeries around the country. So I know you've got the skills to pull this off, but tell us about Kid and dig into the menu a little bit and find out a little bit more about each of you as we go along.
Okay, I guess I'll start. I would say the brainchild for Kid is Sam and Tamara. Those are the owners. Brett and Sam are two brothers who were born and raised in Long Island, but grew up. A lot of their childhood was spent in the city in Manhattan, specifically the Upper West Side. And they opened the Commons Coffee Shop at this point 8 years ago, and then Motel Morris about 7 years ago. I was brought on last August to sort of help, revamp Motel Morris, bring up to date a little bit, and then also with the idea of opening this a pizza concept kit. And they were sort of very specific. They didn't have an idea of what they wanted the rest of the menu to look like. Vague idea, but they were very specific about the style and type of pizza they wanted. They wanted, something that spoke to their experience growing up in the city, the old school New York triangle slice, but in pie form. And that's also, it's kind of the pizza that I mostly grew up with as well. I'm also born and raised in the city. So to me, it was kind of like, all right, this is, I obviously don't have the baking background that Max does, but it was something I was very happy to be part of.
And thus Max enters the scene. And Max, you've been everywhere, including Roberta's over in Brooklyn. You've been at Tartine in San Francisco. So you've got, sort of the what would you call it, the baking gene. But how did you enter into the picture here? Because you've both been also, I'll just say it, as at some very top Michelin starred restaurants and big concepts. So how did the two of you how did you enter into the Kid project?
Yeah, I mean, sort of in a similar it actually was a friend of a friend had put me in touch with Brett Salmon, to who Ian was just mentioning. At this point, it was like almost 2.5 years ago. And I think that at that point, Kid was kind of just very much a concept and an idea that they were coming up with. And they were just looking for people. And a friend put me in touch because they were interested. They wanted there to be pizza, but they'd also sort of talked about wanting bread at some point for the Commons, which was which is the little coffee shop that Ian was mentioning. And I guess they used to have the bread. When I was in New York, I still worked at a place called Torst for a while, and Luxus, which was like Luxus was like the tasting menu in the back, and Torst was kind of like a beer bar. It's still there in Greenpoint.
So you were doing, was it like bar style pizzas?
We were doing actually there, it was like kind of a complicated Nordic tasting menu in the back. And then we had like a smaller beer, like very Nordic beer menu, like food bar drinking menu. So I was doing bread for that. And when we closed so basically the fine dining part closed, the whole thing turned into bar food, and I expanded the bread menu a lot. And so they actually used to come and get bread there a lot. So when we made that connection, they kind of wanted me to be involved with this in some way. And I had already moved back to San Francisco. And so for me, I didn't really want to like drop everything I had. I'd started my own company that is turning into a brick and mortar restaurant next month. And so I couldn't exactly just leave,
Yeah.
but it kind of was a thing that we talked about for a few months, and they still wanted there to be some involvement. And so I think when Kid finally was fully formed, the idea was just for me to help out a little bit. I mean, Ian's definitely taken the lead on the menu. I really was just there to support with the pizza, the dough product, specifically on the dough side, but the pizza training too as well when we opened.
Now, of course, you're doing more than just pizza there. And just to give some context, you're in Chelsea, which is like, are you in the Chelsea market or right in that little neighborhood right there? Or
Yeah, we're still further up. We're up on 18th Street,
okay.
just off of 7th Avenue. So not
Okay.
too far, but not really.
And Ian, you were previously at Motel Morris, which is owned by the same brothers, right?
Yeah, so they brought me on. The idea was, again, Motel Owners has been open for 7 years. Very cute sort of neighborhood spot. They wanted me just revamp the menu, but the whole idea was kind of like get Motel Morris cleaned up a little bit, and then start working on the pizza concept. Even when I signed on, I even let them know, it's very upfront of, I have in ABC Kitchen, I have worked with pizza, but by no means do I consider myself a baker. I worked with one kind of dough, and obviously what they were looking for was very different. So I made it very clear. I'm like, that, running a restaurant, the rest of the menu, that's my forte. Like the actual dough production, I'm like, we're gonna have to bring someone in for that.
So give me a Max.
Pretty much, yeah.
And so which is great that you guys could work together. And so, of course, a lot of the people that tune into Pizza Quest, where we talk about a lot of things besides pizza, but pizza is sort of the touch point of everything and the obsession that we all share. So they're going to want to know a little bit about your pizza. What do you, Max? What do you bring to the dough? Is it you've been at Tartine? Are you doing a sourdough leavened pizza dough or something else?
We're actually not, and it's sort of a funny. I mean, I think as Ian mentioned, like the goal here in a way was to really try to make like a nostalgic New York slice, in more of a personal size format, which I think is what actually makes it sort of unique. Like I hear a lot of people are saying like, you're doing New York style pizza in New York, like that doesn't really, what's making that? Yeah. And I think there is something to be said about that. That's true, but there aren't a lot of places in New York where you get a pizza that sort of is that really good quality, like what you'd used to getting in like an 18, 20-inch pizza, but and just having slices, but having a smaller format so that you can try a couple different kinds, or you can, have it with other food and the rest of the menu. So I think there is something a little bit unique there.
You're kind of market driven. So in addition to trying to do a classic New York slice, you're also kind of updating it with with farm fresh food, or you go to the market every day and just make pizzas out of whatever's seasonal.
Yeah, I mean, Ian did a great job with that on the menu. And I mean, yeah, you feel free to talk more about that.
I was reading about some of them, Ian. Aside from the plain and the pepperoni mushroom, you've got, here's what it says in the blurb, is marjoram cream sauce, duxelles and wild mushrooms, seasonal pizzas such as anchovies and broccoli rabe with red sauce, broccoli rabe and what is this? Calabrian or can't is it maybe
Cantabrian.
Calabrian anchovies, Cantabrian anchovies, limon with ricotta, white sauce, thinly sliced lemons, Brussels sprouts, and pancetta with ricotta, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it sounds like you're having fun with the concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we definitely wanted to have, there's always some classics that, you have to have the plain, you have to have a pepperoni. Like that's, can't argue with that. Outside of that, trying to think of the different components, we talked about just a white pie, also sort of very, very classic. And that's where it was kind of like, okay, like, when, Max came on board, we did a whole tasting of different pizzas around the city and different doughs and really trying to identify and articulate like what exactly are we looking for in the texture, the flavor, the sweetness. Even, with Max working on developing the sauce of, getting different, different kinds of tomatoes, playing around with the different levels of some garlic, of different cheeses. So those were all sort of very small fine tunings for the classics. For something as a white pie, it was like, okay, how can we, you know, make this a little, still have it be this classic white pie, but have something that makes it extremely unique and distinctive.
Yeah.
And for that, it was like, got some Meyer lemons coming in right now. And so our white pie is dotted with very thinly sliced Meyer lemons. So, most of the white pie eats as, it's really good fresh ricotta, it's like all that other stuff. But then every now and then you get this bite with like a little surprise. The mushroom was another one, obviously at, ABC Kitchen when I worked there, we had a mushroom pizza with a farm egg on the menu that was loaded with mushrooms. This egg was a very big decadent thing. And for this, part of the thing, and this was also working with Max, was, articulate that for a New York triangle slice, you can't overload it with product. Like we still want to be able to lift that slice and have it be the right thing, hold its shape and have that texture. So it was kind of like working like, how do we get these mushrooms, get this, flavor profile to be on the pie without overwhelming the dough itself. And that's when I was like, all right, like, heavily roast some mushroom, grind it up, make a duxelle, have that be the base. And it was fun because there was, I kind of built a menu of ideas I had for what flavors I want to hit. And it was once Max was in the kitchen with me, working with him, and like, the mushroom pie in particular was one where I had this idea, and then Max was like, well, what if we, make this the base of the cream, and, like adding these little touches to make sure that the end result was exactly the type of slice that we were going for.
So a real collaboration of in that regard. Yeah. So when you were going around the city, doing your research, so to speak, which is fun research, right? Tasting pizzas everywhere.
Yeah,
What were some of the highlights of that search? What were some of the takeaways that you brought into your concept from which places? Can you shout out a few of the places that really inspired you to create the pizza that you are now making?
Yeah, I mean, it was in 2 days, we went to we did the classic L'Industrie Mamas 2 right now in we did the 2 West Village locations. Then we went over to Scars and had cellos after that. So that was all one afternoon.
But we also had Joe's in there.
Yeah, okay. I was going to ask about Joe's, and you have to have been part of that. Joe's never seems to fall off the map as being a destination point.
Yeah, yeah. So that was truly all within a couple hours, which was a lot. It is work, actually.
Oh, exactly. You got to pace yourself on something like that.
Well, it's like you get to the first place, you like eat the full slice. Second place, you eat the full slice. After a while, you're like, ooh, how many more slices?
a bite, yeah, one little bite, yeah, right, right.
So we did all of that. Then we had dinner that night at Lucia, the Alimentari, which was an interesting version to see because they're doing a little bit of more of the concept of like a smaller New York style, more individual personal size 12-inch New York style as well.
Yeah.
And then the next day we went to Chrissy's and Feeney and potentially one more. And then we had dinner at Rott's in Jersey City, which is always
Russia, yeah, with Dan.
yeah, exactly. So, and in terms of the I think what was really interesting for me to see, and in terms of trying to develop a dough that would work for this, was the different tastes and preferences that people liked and wanted. Because you've got even on that spectrum, you've got Joe's, which is much more the old school, pretty traditional, definitely like multiple different, like straight yeasted, sweeter dough, sweeter sauce, not necessarily getting as hard of a bake on it. Like there's a lot of different qualities that kind of fit a little bit more of that maybe up until 5-10 years ago New York style slice,
Right.
which and the owners who grew up more with that, and like Sal and Carmine's was kind of their like personal nostalgic reference point, I think have like a certain amount of interest in that type of a slice. But then you go to L'Industrie, which is obviously kind of the darling, like it's incredible, but that's sort of the slice that I feel like everyone wants to shoot for nowadays.
Is the industry in Man? I thought it was in Brooklyn. Is it in Manhattan?
There's two. Yeah. So they opened a West Village location, I want to say maybe a year ago, maybe less. And
Yeah, I think it was just about a year ago.
Great. They sure have been getting a lot of positive press, and so
they deserve it. It's great. It's really, really good. But it's definitely a different style. And so it's funny. It was sort of funny to contrast those two, and useful to sort of be like, okay, you like these components of this dough, but you also like that this one does have, a biga, and so and a little bit longer fermentation on the pre-ferment side at least. And there's it's a bit lighter, it's baked like this bit of definitely a bolder bake on this. Like the crust, it has some actual like Maillard reaction, so just like
yeah.
trying to see what they liked so that I could kind of get a sense of what to work towards, was a really useful way of doing it, even though it was a lot of pizza in a short amount of time.
So and in the end, you have to come up with something that both of you guys love. It can't whether it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that from everybody, but it's
Yeah.
got to be in the end. It's got to be your pizza. So how would you then describe what the result was? Is
Yeah.
the merger or the convergence of all of these inputs.
Right. I mean, to me, at least what I was going for with the formula for the dough itself is still really rooted flavor wise. So we stuck with a straight yeasted dough, not even with, I played with a version with Polish and a version with
Yeah.
Giga. I didn't go with sourdough at any point really for it, mostly because that's not that you can obviously have a sourdough pizza that's not very sour, but that just wasn't really the flavor or the texture that they had talked about liking. And then on top of that, I think I felt a little uncomfortable as someone who was working on this in more of like a consulting capacity with passing off a project like sourdough, which just is so complicated at times, and
Yeah.
there's just a lot more to be noticing and paying attention for and knowing how to troubleshoot on a daily basis.
Yeah, and if you see what Dan Richards doing at Raza, he's almost got like a laboratory there, and he micromanages every degree of temperature. and that would be a lot to manage.
You pretty much need that to ensure the consistency.
Yeah.
So I didn't. It felt easier as like more managed, not necessarily easier, but more executable, basically, to pass along a recipe that was straight yeasted or would have had the pouliche. But we ended up in a few different head-to-head tastings. I actually sort of liked, for what we were going for, the straight yeasted dough better. And what it really, I think the way I would describe it is that it has a lot of those principles of like straight yeasted, long fermentation, though not like not incredibly long, like the way that some New York style places will do, like 72 hours in the fridge. Not quite that long, but still like a longer, slower fermentation. On the slightly sweeter end, there's a little bit of sugar in the dough, not much, but just a touch to get it slightly more active, but also to add a little bit of that like yeasty, malty sweetness.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you get in New York style. But the biggest difference to me is really the quality of flours, where a lot of New York style pizzerias that might still use like an all trumps, let's say.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, that's the big issue these days is the flour, of course.
Yeah. So we're using a combination of one of the flours from Central Milling and then one of the flours from Cairn Spring Mills, which I want
Yeah.
a lot at Tartine, and I love their flours, and especially it's that and they're both nice flowers. The Central Milling's great, but that Cairn Spring, we're using Sequoia there. Which is the
Sequoia, yeah.
variety.
I'm familiar with Cairn Spring. I just recently did a class that they sponsored, so I had to really come up to speed on their flour, and it performs very differently from a lot of the other mills because they don't put any malt or any enzymes in there. It's just pure flour.
Right.
But it's good. But it has great flavor.
Because they're able to mill it. They do that dual, so they both roller mill and stone mill, but they're able to keep the temperature a lot lower on their roller mill, so you're not having damaged starches, but at the same time, you are getting a finer flour. So they're able to keep a much higher ash content in a lot of them. So the Sequoia we're using is a Type 85, which for pizza is like pretty unusual. Yeah, there's like 40% Type 85 flour in this pizza dough. That's like not very typical, I would say.
In a way, it's kind of French. It's kind of very, very poilon, like.
Totally. Yeah, definitely. But it brings a lot of that maltiness that you're talking about in a way, because it still has more of the bran and the germ without sort of having to add that in through, by basically adding addition.
If I recall correctly, I think the Sequoia, they call it an all-purpose flour, don't they? Not a bread flour.
Yeah.
So it gives a lower protein.
The Sequoia and their Edison are both like that, and they're both around 11 to 12% protein, because a lot of their other flours, which are great, but I mean, and really good for bread, like their Trailblazer or their Glacier Peak, those are like 13.5%.
Yeah.
They're very, very strong.
And that would be a little bit more elastic for your guys to stretch.
And it's a little bit tougher, I find, when you're eating. Like, for me, a really good classic New York style slice is strong enough to stretch and to pick up the piece and not fall over. But when you eat it, you don't want to have this like tough resistance and chewy. You're eating this whole slice. If your jaw's like tired by the end, that's fine.
You're not eating a bagel.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So that must have been fun for you guys to kind of like fine tune all of that. You must have been were you working on that back in San Francisco and then kind of sending them, try this, try that?
Yeah. And then I came back and we did I was there for about a week in November, and we tried everything together, like kind of did a like A/B testing of a lot of different of the doughs and then of the sauces and cheeses, like Ian was saying. And then I came back again for the opening. So it was a little bit of back and forth around it. But yeah, very fun process, honestly.
That sounds like
we were receiving a lot of pictures of him recipe testing in San Francisco. A lot of food porn coming our way of like, okay, that pizza looks amazing.
Yeah, we want that one. Well, Ian, I was going to ask you about that because now you've got to train your team to execute the pizzas. First of all, thank you for sharing all that knowledge about the flour,
Sure.
but because I know a lot of our followers want to know, those details are important to them. What about the oven? What kind of oven do you use? Is it a gas deck? Is it brick? Is it, obviously it's not Neapolitan style pizza, it's New York style. So are you baking it New York style in like a Pizza Master or some other type of pizza?
So it's a Pizza Master. The entire kitchen's electric, so there's no gas. So it's good. We have a 3-deck oven, although we mostly, I mean, certain services, we've had a couple Fridays and Saturdays where definitely all 3 decks are being used, engaged, but usually we're able to just keep it on 2. And yeah, it was one of the things that even when Max came, it was like, I never used a pizza master when I was at ABC. We had was the wood stone, the hearth, and
Yeah.
gas assist and fire. And so in working with this, before we opened this project, the owners took me out to a restaurant, a place in Brooklyn that had one, just because I was like, I've never seen this pizza oven. Let me see what it does. And the chef that was consulting for this restaurant that was opening was like, yeah, these things are like amazing. They, cook like a laser. You can set the bottom, the deck, the bottom at one setting, the top at one setting. But that was definitely one of another situation where it's like, okay, like this is definitely another component of this that I don't have the same familiarity with. And then even when Max got there, that was another round of testing, and not just the dough and the sauce and cheese, but then getting in there like what's the cook time? What is it, the floor have to be? And yeah, I mean, right now we're pretty consistent. It's I think we're at 6:30. Then we have a setting set 7 to 3. We'll have to adjust it on busy services, like also start cranking one up. But pretty consistently, we're working with that setting, and it's about a 6-minute cook time.
That's nice. Yeah. So, and all your pizzas are they perform at about the same. They don't need a separate deck for some of the white pizzas or this or that.
No, if anything, for something we'll have a screen if we just need to take it off the floor, but that's usually more of just where we are in service and how the oven's performing, less to do with the actual pizza itself. And that's actually one of the things when I built. So now, we open for brunch now. I was building new pizzas with different toppings. Part of it is, I'll have, and this is happening, I'll have a cook or a sous chef will go too heavy on the topping because they think either this flavor has to come through, and then the end result is, either it's just too heavy that it doesn't pick up, or it's not fully, the topping is not fully cooking all the way through. And it's like, that's been part of my training process for my sous chef, my cooks, is like, we now have to like, for this style of pizza, for this style of dough, this is how far we can take the toppings. And if we're not, if by reducing the quantity of it, you're not hitting the mark on the flavor, then you sort of have to boost the intensity in whatever the sauce or the component, whatever it is. Like that has to be adjusted, not the volume of stuff on the pie.
Well, and that's part of the learning curve. How long have you been open now, the kid?
We just almost 4 months now.
Okay, so by now you've had enough cycles and learning curve to kind of start to dial it in. Do you feel like you've got your team, pretty much ready for the Sweet 16, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I look at you. So my sous chef there, I've worked with him before. Actually, he was a line cook for me when I worked at Lodi. So he was also a little bit familiar with the pastry department there. He moved here from Venezuela. In Venezuela, he actually also ran a pizza restaurant. Obviously, a very different style of dough, but so he has a lot of familiarity with dough. He also like loves learning. So like when I told him like we're doing this pizza concept, he was there in the kitchen also with Max trying to learn it. Our dough production cook right now has been with us since opening, and he's also great. Like, he was there through all the training. He's now helped us train 2 more people in the prep team to help shape and form the dough as well. But, having that core group that was there pre-opening, through the opening, the training, and now also, there comes a point where I've had talks with pizza cooks where it's like, we'll check in on the dough every day and how's this one, how's that one. And I remember like last week, one of my cooks was like, this dough is like the best it's ever been. And so the next day I'm like running to the prep cook, like into the prep kitchen. I'm like, okay, I'm like, whatever you did with the dough yesterday, like it was easier to work with, like the pizza coming out just looking fantastic. And he's like, I let it sit out proofing a little bit longer this time because obviously they're in the basement, like the temperature fluctuates. I'm like, so for me, there is also, and I've told the cooks and sous chefs, like that constant feedback between what your experience with working with the dough and, telling the guy that's making the dough every day, like he's not here at night, he doesn't see it, but he might have picked up on something that he was doing different. So I do like to make sure that sort of that feedback, that communication is constantly happening.
Yeah, because they're developing the craft of your style of pizza, but it has to be the same from, the day shift and the night shifts have to share that knowledge. Yeah. But
Yeah, exactly.
that's exciting, that creative process, because, we're talking about, a New York style pizza, but it's really an artisanal pizza. It's something that you guys are crafting from new cloth, because you've pulled from various influences to create something that's distinctly, well, it's the kid pizza, but what does kid stand for? It's all capitalized, so we assume it's gotta be more than just kids, you know?
So actually, this is a little bit of, again, going back to the owners and, growing up in New York and the city. So a lot of this restaurant has to do a little bit with that touch of nostalgia. of, going back to the pizzas of their youth, the Sal and the Carmines, that sort of thing. And even the space itself is, meant to be sort of like all multi-purpose is the right word, but there is a sense of nostalgia where you can have families and kids in here, but then, dim the lights, up the music, and now this is like a really fun New York City restaurant. And so the name comes a little bit from like the New York slang, like, what up, kid? Like, what's going on, kid?
Yeah.
And so then there was that. Then there was the play of, both brothers are parents in the neighborhood. They see, they're friends with a lot of people in the neighborhood. They know that there are a lot of families. Their idea was, this should be a kid-friendly place. Young parents with their kids can come in at like 5 o'clock, have an early dinner, you know, and that also is kind of what spoke to the menu of, it's obviously it's pizza focused. That is the concept. But the idea was there should be a menu around it where, you know, if your kids really want pizza, this is where you're coming and you had your pizza, you had your fill, there's a full offering that is also, less kid, more adult sort of thing, but still, playful. It all is supposed to sort of work together and talk to each other in a way that, again, at different points of the night, the space feels very, very different. The clientele is very different. And that's been a fun thing to also work with as well.
Don't you have one dining area that's, like, dedicated to a Hollywood director? I was reading about who's the director that did I've just blanked out on his name. Whimsical, to the sense of whimsy that the brothers seem to like in the
So yeah, I mean, downstairs, I would say there is almost like in the PDR is like a Wes Anderson.
that's it, Wes Anderson, yeah.
Yes, like, there is. So when upstairs is very high ceilings, very light and bright. Tamara, her background is a little bit more in design, so she, her eye to, attention to detail, like the space is really well curated. And then you turn the corner, heading towards the back of the kitchen. You turn the corner next to the bathrooms. There's a, old school, like a video game console that has an emulator for every gaming system up until PS1. So like kids and adults can go back there and, play Atari or whatever it is. And then you go down these, you know, brightly lit, during the daytime, brightly lit, but get dimmed down, yellow orange staircase that descends into the basement where we have the two PDRs, and one is like the green room and one is more of like and then there's an orange bar in the back and more of a lounge that has a skylight. So there is a very sort of different feel and vibe to that space as well, which when it's not a PDR, we use as an extension of the dining room.
I see. So have you had Wes Anderson in yet?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, if he snuck in at some point.
Make sure you capture that. Well, that'll be an Instagrammable moment, I suppose.
Sure.
But and also any of his actors, any of the actors are associated with him. But as soon as I read that, I immediately kind of could envision that that feeling, because his films definitely have a very unique director specific feeling to them. It sounds like you're going for that as well.
I think if you go in, you go down to the basement, you'll get the feeling. You'll definitely have, yeah, I think you'll feel it.
I wanted to ask you about some of the other items on your menu besides the pizzas, because I was reading about some, and I'm sure some of these have even changed or evolved since this came out. But you have a lemon tahini dip that you serve with crevettes. Is that something that's still part of the menu?
Yeah, so I actually, right now we are starting, just seeing our spring changes. So what we've seen now is the Brussels sprout pizza came off. I have an asparagus pizza on the menu. I'm working on a sugar snap salad. The first batch of sugar snaps I got in here were so horrendously woody that it's like, yeah, I'm not even recipe testing with these. Like I can't eat this. But no, the rest of the menu has stayed pretty consistent. We are, we're trying to see where, what our clientele, what our regulars are sort of more receptive to and responsive. And we found that, certain, we have a lot of deuces, and then we have a lot of larger tables, like 6 tops and 8 tops, and they order very different. So I haven't actually, we haven't had any dishes that are like, okay, this one's not working. It's more of just like, okay, we've noticed that this doesn't sell quite as much. This what doesn't sell our 2 tops, but our 6 tops and higher tend to really order these. So we're still sort of in that phase of like tracking what the sales are and how, and again, how people are working their way through the menu.
Yeah.
So what is kind of very nice for us, which we're very happy with, is we don't, rarely do we have people who are just coming in for a drink and a pizza. We have the occasional person at the bar, but usually people are coming in and, a deuce will order 2 appetizers, 2 pizzas, 2 veggies, and then the larger table, the pizzas will sort of scale up. We definitely had to figure out in terms of our having dough production. We've had to 86 pizza twice since we've been open, and it was just where they decided to sort of throw open the doors a bit and not give me a heads up. And I'm like, there comes a point where it's like, I prepped for this many covers. We're doing 40 more covers. Like,
Wow. Yeah.
there's absolutely nothing I can do.
It's a kind of a good problem in a way, but it's still,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's, not even alerted the owners and the management to be like, you guys, if we're to start pushing these, like, I need to know minimum 24 hours out, but ideally I need to have a plan 48 hours out. It's also, we don't have the biggest amount of space in the storage space in the prep kitchen. So even just ordering the right amount of flour, like when we first did our brunch weekend, I was definitely, the flour delivery came late. I had to ask this guy to stay late. It was definitely a little juggling game, which now we're, in that sense, we're in a good rhythm, a good pattern. But yeah, but as of now, the menu's pretty consistent. So we still have the crudité with the lemon tahini dip, all those good things.
You've worked for some really big name chefs, Jean Georges, 11 Madison Park. You've been at some of the best restaurants in the world. What's it like, the transition, and what applies from that world that's still true in your current world, but also different in this world?
I think in those bigger properties, I definitely learned a lot of, like, the necessity of organization and systems and the training. It's, to what Max was saying earlier, one of my things was, I, like, again, ABC Kitchen, I had John George's pizza dough, which is, towards the end is very high hydration, but it's just, mixed at the end of the night for the next morning to roll. Like, in terms of playing with other sorts of cultures and ferments, I have more experience in the dairy and the pickle world. I've never worked as much with dough. I did learn how to, troubleshoot the dough at ABC Kitchen, but that was also a very sort of quick, easy thing. When Max was developing this dough, that was in the back of my head. One of my concerns of, like, this is, aside from managing this other restaurant, is here's this program that I want to be able to do it justice. I want to be able to make sure that I'm carrying it on and maintaining it. So with the fact that we were doing all these dough tastings, that across the board we landed on this dough with this level, this level of ferment, was like, this is, for me, something that I feel very confident in being able to manage and being able to oversee. But a lot of that was, and again, this was very much back to the genre training of, when you're training someone new, you start with the production level training, things that are bulk mass produced. Because if something goes, if a cook on the line, like, misseasons one item and I have to comp one table thing, like, so be it, or we fry that. If something happens in the production kitchen that is off, like, that can potentially, ruin the whole day's service.
Yeah,
Not
sink
more.
the whole ship. Yeah.
So that's been a lot of my focus, and in train my sous chefs, of, like, it's kind of, because it happens in the basement, it's not, it's not in the upstairs kitchen, like, it's easy to sort of wander away from it. It's like, that really is what is sort of driving this. Like, we need to make sure that foundation is so tight and so strong, where, like I said, I'd rather have to have the owners and the manager comp one table tonight because we were focused on something else, versus literally have the product that, every table is getting one. Like, every table is getting a pizza. Like, if the dough is off, like,
Right.
what are we doing here? So
Yeah, you're in trouble. Yeah.
I think that sort of, that attention to detail, that focus on that training, and kind of, it's a little bit of strategizing of, like, where, as when I'm kind of as a chef, like, where do my priorities need to lie? And that was something that I've taken to every restaurant that I've gone to after that.
Well, what kind of feedback are you getting from your friends from the white tablecloth world, that have come in to Kid, to check it out?
Oh, I mean, it's been very positive all across the board. I think, people have absolutely loved the pizza. I think that they also appreciate that there is this, it, nothing is an afterthought. Like, there's the pizza, which is, like, very diligently worked on, and, worked very hard to nail. And there's this menu that we've crafted around it, where whether you're only doing pizza, or you're doing a pizza and a side, or you're just, you're done with pizza, you want something else. Like, we're not trying to pad the menu just to, like, sell you something, or have something that fills the need. It really was a very conscious effort of, like, we want every aspect of this experience to hit. And I think, right now, that even, like, right now, the cocktail development that they're doing, our AGM is, like, has really, like, been, like, pushing some things. Like, he's really excited about it. We opened with one menu that was kind of like, there were some things that we brought from Old Town Morris, other things that were very new for Kid. And now there's a full, like, second generation of cocktail menu that's in the works, which is also very exciting.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that you've got a pretty strong beverage program there, and well, let me get you, with this question. What would you say has been the biggest surprise, either in a positive or negative sense, in terms of a menu item that you thought this is going to kill it, or one that you weren't expecting to be, a big hit, but became the surprise hit that now you can't get it off the menu, even though it was supposed to be a, LTO.
I mean, honestly, the sautéed pea shoots is something where I love pea shoots. I like it is as like a side dish. Looking at there's a whole veggie section of the menu, and I was trying to think of things that are really like unique and tasty. And one thing's like sometimes you just want like a side of sautéed greens, but how do you sort of elevate that? And so doing these sautéed pea shoots with garlic oil and chicken fat, and for me it's like very reminiscent of I go to Chinatown, I go to New York Noodle Town. Like this is my side dish. This is great, and it has been one of those things that I just wasn't expecting how people are going to respond to it. And even now, like I've seen people actually trying, like they'll pair it, especially with like the white pie, like the alimone. Like it's obviously a good, almost like accompaniment to any of the proteins, but they're actually pairing it with some of the pizzas, which I wasn't, of all the veggies, that was not the one that I was expecting that to happen to. So that's been kind of fun to see.
Are you still doing mozzarella fritters?
Oh yeah, yeah. That was one of the things I actually did for my original tasting for, you know, when I did that tasting with the owners, it was for Motel Morris, but with an eye to this, to this pizza restaurant. So I'd say 75% of my tasting was intended for Morris. And then I threw in a couple of dishes that I, was like, this is, this would be for this sort of pizza concept. And when, the way you talked about this sort of like nostalgic, New York City slice, pizza joint, like food that works in there. Like, one of my guilty pleasures, like I love mozzarella sticks, like breaded, melted, melted cheese and bread. How can you go wrong? And in trying to think of like, how do you make this more special and how do you, elevate it? And then also one of the things I'm like, it's like, all right, get the little mozzarella balls. Like, hey, it's not these long sticks. And yeah, that's a very big hit at the restaurant.
Is a mozzarella fritter basically mozzarella with some other ingredients, or egg or anything like that, to make it like, puff?
Yeah.
Or is-
No, so it's not puff, but we do roll it's the mozzarella balls that we roll in pretty heavily seasoned flour
I see.
because the mozzarella can sometimes be like the mozzarella itself is, I think, the way that it's sold and intended to be used culinarily or for customers is in a salad that you would dress it with vinaigrette, and here we're not. So we found we actually have to like up the salt there, and it's flour, egg wash, panko, and then fried until golden brown, gooey in the center, and then gets paired with a spicy marinara.
Yeah. I mean, I could see why people would, obsess over stuff like that. That kind of goes back to the bar food, heritage that you guys, that both of you've worked in those kind of setups as well. Any other surprises in terms of, well, either with the pizza or the side menu?
I would say with pizza, I think one thing that that for me was sort of a surprise, but I'm happy to see was people really liked the broccoli rabe and Cantabrian anchovy pizza, which is delicious. And I think broccoli and anchovies not necessarily like the most. It's not that it's surprise that that's a good combination. I think a lot of people are aware that that's a good combination, but not necessarily on a pizza. And it's a red pizza that doesn't have a ton of cheese. It just has like a little bit of grana padano on there. And so, a lot of people still have this idea that a pizza has to have a lot of cheese, that a pizza without a cheese, isn't a pizza type of idea. And also it's pretty anchovy forward. And
Yeah.
I would like both Ian and I like love anchovies. I think the Cantabrian anchovies, these are John Bacart. They're some of the best in the world. I just eat them on their own, but I wasn't sure people would necessarily go for that. And it's been a really popular pizza as well.
Yes.
It's always great to have unexpected surprises like that just take off. Well,
Yeah.
before we forget, let's tell everybody again where you're located so they can find you. I can't wait to come up to New York and see you guys and try some of these things. They sound wonderful, and it sounds like you're just having fun with it. Do the pizzas come in different sizes, or is it one size only?
It's one size only. It's by the pie. We don't do by the slice.
Is it a
Uh,
12-inch, 14-inch? What is it?
it's about 14-inch.
Oh, okay. So it's a substantial size. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they're not small. We sort of like to say that they're personal, and you can eat a whole one for sure, but they're not.
I probably would. Yeah. But so far,
But we say it's like, it's not really a personal pie, but a two-top will routinely come in, order some snacks and 2 pizzas and finish everything. So
Yeah, totally. And it does they eat pretty light, I will say. Like it's not the heaviest dough. It's as Ian was said, like we really tried to focus on not over topping them. So it's not necessarily you're not you don't feel terrible afterwards, at least, is I think the good thing.
Well,
But
we always go into a restaurant and overorder thinking we're going to take stuff home for later, and then you got nothing to take home at the end of the meal, which is a good sign. So tell us, how can they find you? Where are you?
Kid Pizza is at 157 West 18th Street. So 18th Street, just off of 7th Avenue, Manhattan. And we also now gone live with delivery. So on the website, Kid Pizza NYC.
How does it travel? Is it a good out of the box?
Yeah. So we actually, took the advice of Max, got the sort of like pizza box coordinated liners. Well, before we launched delivery, the owners actually placed a couple deliverers to see what it was like. And they were very, very pleasantly surprised, very happy with what was coming out there.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you guys have done a lot of forethought, which is, great, and bringing a lot of what's the word, your past history, and the trainings that you've had from both disciplines, to fore. So congratulations, Max. What are you doing in San Francisco? You have a new concept about to open?
yeah, also pizza restaurant. It's called Jules. And yeah, I'm very, very close now, almost at the finish line. Hopefully about 2 weeks out from opening. But yeah, so I'm the masochistic type that decided to help try to open another restaurant in New York while opening one on my own here.
And is it a similar kind of pizza or a different kind of style?
Similar in a lot of ways, in the sense that it is kind of a sort of New York personal-ish. I would call mine a little bit more between New York and Neapolitan, but closer to New York for sure. I like to be able to pick up a slice and not have it flop everywhere.
Right.
And similar with a lot of seasonal stuff. I mean, obviously, California is. I'm very lucky to have great produce available all year round here, pretty much. But and then the dough is a bit different. I mean, I do have mine is there is sourdough. There's a little bit of pouliche and a very small amount of commercial use, bit more complicated process.
Will you be there hands-on in the operation then?
For sure. Yes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, hopefully not forever, but
And so when in San Fran, I'm more likely, even though I live in North Carolina, I'm more likely to make it to San Francisco than to New York these days.
yeah.
Where in San Francisco will it be?
The neighborhood's called Lower Haight, which is sort of central. I'm basically right on the corner of Haight Street and Fillmore Street, which are two of the sort
I
of.
used to live like 3 blocks from there. Yeah, I lived in the city. Yeah. Yeah, I would have been able to walk over if I was still in that same house. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that sounds great.
Oh, you should come by when you're out here next. So.
And Jules has a Jule or J.
Exactly. Jules. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Jules in San Francisco. After you get open, let us know. Maybe we can get you back to talk about how things are going there.
Yeah.
And Ian, thank you so much for sharing everything that you have, and congratulations on another successful launch. It sounds like it's going well. And
Yeah, thank you.
again, I can't wait to get back up to the city and see you. Again, the restaurant is called KID, K-I-D, capital K-I-D. For anyone who's listening, it sounds like around the 7th Avenue and 18th Street, in that sort of around.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, fantastic. Guys, congratulations on all your success. Thank you for joining us today on Pizza Quest. And thank all of you for tuning in. We'll see you at the next episode. And until then, go get some pizza. It sounds like you got the new option both in New York City and in San Francisco very soon. So we'll see you all there. Thank you all. See you in the next episode.